Welcome to Rooted and Rising Healing. I'm your host, Hallie Roderick, and this space is for women rebuilding after betrayal. Here we make sense of what happened, find truth again, and reconnect with who you really are beyond the pain. Whether you're staying, leaving, or still in the middle, your story matters. Together, we'll explore truth, clarity, and the quiet courage it takes to rise from the wreckage of what was into the wholeness of who you're becoming. You're safe to be here, in the messy middle, in the rebuilding, and in the rising. Let's begin. If you're a mom or a daughter and you've ever felt that quiet desire for deeper connection between you, but you don't want it to feel forced or uncomfortable, I want to invite you into something really special. It's called Becoming Together, a mother-daughter retreat in Sedona, Arizona, happening September 8th through the 12th, that I'm hosting alongside my own daughters. This experience is really close to our hearts because we understand that every mother-daughter relationship is unique and it's not always perfect. And this isn't about fixing anything. It's about creating a space to soften, to breathe, and to connect in your own way. Over a few beautiful days in Sedona, we'll guide you through experiences like breathwork, sound baths, mindful movement, even a vortex hike, and of course, nourishing meals. Each of us bringing our own gifts to support you, while also honoring your individual journey. There's no pressure to open up before you're ready, no expectation to be anything other than yourself, just a safe, supportive space to reconnect with yourself, with each other, and with something greater. If you feel even the smallest pull, you can find more information in the show notes, because you don't have to have a perfect relationship to begin becoming together. Welcome to today's episode of the Rooted and Rising podcast. Appreciate you being here. Today, we're going to talk about bitterness, which is, I believe, one of the most misunderstood parts of betrayal recovery. A lot of times people might feel shame around it. Maybe church tells you to just pray about it and make it go away, or even well-meaning friends or family might say just forgive and move on, as if it were that simple. And so today's guest knows it's not just that simple. Tesa Saulman is a licensed mental health counselor and certified sex addiction therapist, and the founder of Root to Bloom Therapy in Pensacola, Florida. She works every day with betrayed spouses, couples, and individuals who are carrying the wounds that haven't always healed right. And she's here to talk with me today about bitterness, resentment, empowerment, and what real healing actually looks like. So Tesa, welcome to Rooted and Rising.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. I agree with you. This is a very misunderstood topic of bitterness. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Did I miss anything on the intro that would be helpful for our audience to know?
No, it's beautiful.
Okay.
It's great.
Great. So we know that bitterness doesn't usually just arrive overnight. So it's also probably not one of those things that's going to just go away overnight. So when you think about how a person or individual arrives at bitterness or resentment, what would you say that journey is like from just being hurt to almost more of a hardness?
I think the really important thing that you said was that didn't wake up bitter. And like it didn't happen overnight. And that there was a journey that eventually got you there. And I think when either a betrayed spouse recognizes in themselves that their heart has hardened or they feel bitter, or maybe they're being accused of bitterness and resentment or described as bitter, that it's forgotten of like, how did we get here? And it's not an immediate response usually. I think betrayed spouses often start in this trap between wanting connection and fear of vulnerability. And in that, there are some bids for connection. And when their heart becomes exhausted, it then becomes a way of self-protection.
Oh, I'm just envisioning that as you're talking about it, like those bids for connection that keep getting met with either defensiveness or blame shifting or shut down or whatever. And then you keep coming back again, trying again, wanting that connection, wanting that reassurance and the safety, keep getting met with the same thing. It almost like becomes a protective measure of where we harden our hearts to protect us from continuing to get the same thing when we reach out for that connection. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. The feeling of disappointment when you have been hurt and your heart has been broken, and the vulnerability it takes for you to have a bid for connection. And I think we should also remember a betrayed spouse's bid for connection is going to look a lot different than someone who hasn't been betrayed. And so that bid for connection could be in an invitation to couples counseling.
Mm.
That's a bid for connection. Or wanting to have a hard conversation, or even asking questions about addiction. And for the betraying partner, they may automatically become defensive, like, oh, they're questioning my sobriety or my recovery because they have questions about addiction. And it's like, well, it could have been. Like, they could have, but like, if we're going to assume the worst, let's assume the best. And the best is maybe that was a bid for connection.
Yeah.
And when that is led by disappointment because of defensiveness or dismissiveness over time, of course you're going to protect yourself. And a hardened heart feels a lot safer than vulnerability.
Yeah, for sure. It's like that act of self-protection. So what's the difference, would you say, between healthy anger and grief and bitterness or resentment?
Yeah, I love describing this because anger isn't bad. I think anger has a bad rap because anger is healthy.
Mm-hmm.
It tells us that something matters, will help us identify injustice, violation, or unmet needs. And the difference between anger and bitterness is when the pain goes unaddressed. And so if anger is sitting there and if it's not addressed, it will harden your heart in time. So when healthy anger happens, it usually can move through us.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stay in us. Bitterness settles in us and then it grows.
Okay. So let me understand if you're saying the way I understand that, because it makes a lot of sense to me. So if we have ways to process the anger and the hurt in a healthy way, we have less of a chance of it settling into that hardness and that bitterness and resentment. So if I find myself in resentment or bitterness, it might be worth taking a step back and going, okay, have there been anger and hurt that I've not been processing through that is leading me to this place now where I feel like I've got these cinder block walls around me?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what needs to happen is what is underneath the protection. So if we think about bitterness as the protection, what is it protecting you from? Like, we know vulnerability, but what has been unmet? And whether that's grief, sadness. And if we can look at that and address the bitterness, I mean, I think there's more that needs to happen before it goes away, but it will be a relief.
Yeah. I always think too, maybe this is just me, but in my own personal journey, resentment visits more than once. It's not just something I've gone through once. I can describe it as waves, where I almost sometimes feel like I have this wave of resentment that will come and it feels like it's going to swallow me up. And that's my cue to go, okay, hold on. First of all, I need to not judge it for being there, not wonder what's wrong with me. I've learned to ride the wave of it and use all my skills and tools to help myself move through it, but not necessarily want it to go away, because even the resentment, it's so closely related to the anger and the hurt that I think there's some real important messages that we need to look at underneath that. But I love the reminder that when it does come, that it's not because I'm not doing something right. It's just giving me a message and I need to pay attention to it. I actually don't like it. No, I actually love anger because I've learned to process anger in a healthy way, and it wasn't always culturally or whatever accepted for me to feel anger. So once I tapped into that, I was like, oh, this actually feels really good to let the anger out in a healthy way.
Yeah.
But I really don't like the resentment because it sits with me and it really impacts a lot of other areas of my life.
I think when anger leads into resentment, resentment leads to rumination. And then
Yes.
that's going to take over the different other areas of your life.
Yeah. I don't think I'd ever
And
made that connection, but you're right. Like the resentment leads to rumination, and that's what is so uncomfortable, is that replay over and over in my mind. Yeah. Appreciate you pointing that out. I had a light bulb moment right there. Yeah.
And I think the rumination, now this is just my thoughts and I'm just free flowing talking. I think it's powerlessness. I think the feeling of powerlessness. When we ruminate on something, it's like we feel like we have lost control.
Yeah. Yep. You're right. I would agree with that. It just feels stuck. It's almost like a stuck energy, like a record that keeps skipping over and over again. And it just is like a stuck energy. Yeah. Okay. So if we're talking about unresolved resentment, I believe there's a definite impact. We talked about it impacting other areas of our life, but I think like at a nervous system level, unresolved resentment can impact us physically and emotionally. So what would you say to someone that finds themselves stuck in resentment and the impact that it might be having on them?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. We know that all of our brain, our mind, and our body are connected. And so we will respond physiologically to what we're feeling. And when people are struggling with resentment and bitterness, irritability, that's the first thing that comes to mind. I'm like, you're going to be irritable, or you could feel numb. We talked about the rumination, so intrusive thoughts and exhaustion, sleep deprivation. I mean, you're just going to be sitting there and you can't sleep because you're so worked up, you're so angry, you have anxiety, you're hypervigilant. And I think it distorts our lens. We're hypervigilant, so we're going to be more protective, where maybe it wouldn't be such a bother to us, like loud chewing is like, now I'm just going to snap. And so our window of tolerance gets smaller.
That's the word I keep thinking of when you're talking, is the window of tolerance. We're like on either end, the top or the bottom of the window of tolerance, and we're either seconds away from snapping and erupting, or we're down here in the shutdown and not able to function. And so being on either edge of that window of tolerance is definitely a reality.
Yeah. And then it just gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Because then resentment's taking up so much room to where now just anything that comes up is going to send us one way or another. And I think that's where empowerment comes from. When I'm talking to betrayed spouses about their resentment, we talk about what can you control? And so you have this resentment and you have your window of tolerance narrowing. And it's like, we need some relief. We need freedom.
Yeah.
And if you are able to make a shift and empower yourself to widen the window of tolerance. And so when we're thinking of how does that happen, I want to be very clear. We are not bypassing whatever's happening on the other end. We just can't control it. So whatever's happening on the other end, it's probably not okay. And it's not right. But if we think about who do you want to be and how do you want to show up? And your integrity, there should be a poll on this. Our window of tolerance, do betrayed spouses go into hyper or hypo? I would say hyper, like the anger. You know,
I would agree with you. I don't know what the poll would say if we had that, but I would say the common reaction that is actually really uncomfortable for a lot of betrayed spouses is that they're so reactive and so hyper aware, and their nervous system is on such high alert that when they normally might not be close to that reactive type of a person, they become more. And that is uncomfortable for a lot of us because it's like, whoa, what is happening to me? This is not who I normally am. And here I am that close to my window of tolerance that I almost lose my ability to choose how I'm going to respond when my nervous system is that heightened and the window is so narrow. I mean, we always 100% have agency, but when there's no space between activation and response, then we find ourselves in that reactive state, which just brings on a whole nother level of shame a lot of times after that happens.
And I think that's where empowerment comes from, of let's take your power back.
Yeah.
And don't let this steal the best parts of you. Do not allow this to shift your identity into someone that you don't want to be and someone who you're not, because you are not your trauma and this isn't you. You're traumatized and you're having a trauma response, but we do have agency and we can take it back. And that is really hard when you are being hurt. And so because bitterness is coming from unresolved pain and hurt, and so usually it's ongoing, and whether the betraying spouse isn't doing their work or their character defects, defensiveness, and their attitude towards it, no matter what it is, and it's hard because I'm making it sound so much easier, but if we can just let them be them, and it's like, I know who I am, and I know what I'm worth, and I know who I want to be. And I'm not going to co-sign what they're putting out. And so whatever action they're giving is my bitterness can co-sign that in some ways. I'm like signing off.
Oh, and I don't like the idea of that. Just keep talking.
And it's like, no. Like, that is not okay. So I'm going to like literally turn away and I'm going to stay in my truth.
Yeah.
And that's empowering.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this in real life application, because I'm thinking about this. If I'm in that place, like let's think early recovery, okay? I'm in that place where I haven't got a lot of recovery under my belt, and so my window of tolerance is small, and I find myself in that reactive or even the shutdown phase a lot, and I'm frustrated with it, and I want to move into empowerment. What does empowerment in real life applicable actions look like? Like, how do I start making those first small steps into things that I can control and actions I can take that can help me move out of that place of bitterness and resentment into empowerment?
Yeah. What came to mind is something my therapist told me. So I have to give her credit because it was a life changer for me. Is I kept telling her, I'm triggered. And like when I'm triggered, and I'm a therapist, so I'm able to like talk circles around, and I'm like, yeah, I'm 0 to 100. And I know when I'm triggered, I'm outside of my window of tolerance. I don't have that much agency. And so in some ways I was kind of justifying my behavior of I don't have control. And a reframe that she gave me was when we think about a trigger on a weapon, like a gun, you pull the trigger, it's not coming back. There's no stopping it. So if we stopped using the word trigger and we used activation, I'm activated. And if we think about activation of like a science experiment with like bubbles, it's like it's activating.
Yeah.
We can put the bubbles down. We can lift the lid off the pot and the steam's going to come up. And so an activation feels a lot easier to control than a trigger.
I love that.
And just changing the verbiage, it changed my entire view of like, I'm activated. I have more control. Because in my mind, I knew if I was triggered, I'm outside of my control, or I felt like it.
I'm a very visual learner, so I appreciate that vision of that. And I've always had some sort of discomfort around the word trigger. I've never liked it. So you hear me on this podcast a lot of times. I use the word activation because there's just something about the word triggered that I don't love. And that just
Yeah.
totally brought that full circle for me, why that makes sense, because we're not choosing to be triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And we can choose how we respond when we are in that activated state. So, and I like
Yes.
the vision of bubbles and all of that, because eventually the bubbles can go away, and there's movement with them. So I
Yeah.
love that visualization. And I also know that our brain is a powerful thing. And so how we think about something will become our reality. So if we think we're triggered and there's nothing we can do about it, it's
Mm-hmm.
probably what will manifest. But if we change that language and do that reframe and go, okay, I'm activated right now. And the activation probably is telling me something. And it's not going to last forever. And I can help myself move through this. That feels like much more movement and empowerment, which is what we're talking about. So that's a great visualization.
Yeah. For the women in early recovery and where it feels incredibly and sometimes impossible to gain the self control, there's freedom in knowing you only need one little sliver of time.
Mm,
Like you just need 1 second to
yeah.
get out of that moment to change the behavior. And that freedom of the time between activation and a response, that small space in time is just being present and awareness of your body.
Yeah. I think of one thing that's helped me, and this kind of shifted my brain too. So I know I've said this on this podcast before, so my listeners have probably heard this, but I live by it. So you'll hear it from me, is that my breath is what I anchor to in that moment when I'm trying to find that space between the activation and how I'm going to choose to respond. So I'm trying to give myself the agency to respond differently. And I do that by anchoring to my breath, because your breath is the one thing that you've had with you from the moment you were born, and you will carry it with you until the moment that you die. It's like our anchor to ourselves. And I think it's a really powerful thing. I also use this tool sometimes for myself. I put my hand over my mouth just as a reminder. It's like imaginary duct tape. I'm not speaking yet until I've anchored into me and I've grounded into my breath and grounded into this present moment. And so that's how I try to give myself that space between the activation or the stimulus and the responses, anchoring into myself and going, okay, yeah, what is happening in my body right now? And I start that with that breath, like, okay, close my mouth, big nostril breath, and a big exhale. And there's my space, right? It doesn't have to be 5 minutes. It can just be, hold on a second. What am I noticing right now? Big deep breath. My husband won't caught me doing it. He's like, you're deep breathing again. And I was like, you're welcome. Yes, I am. And you're welcome. I am. I'm trying to stay in my own integrity and in my own value system. And I'm taking a deep breath. And that's how I'm anchoring into that and giving myself that space.
Yeah, it's amazing what one breath can do.
Yeah. So we're talking really also about like honoring what's underneath the anger and the resentment and the bitterness. We hear this a lot, especially it can be weaponized a little bit, like you just won't forgive or you can't just let go. And from a clinical sense, what does that mean and what does it not mean? Like letting go and just forgiving. Where do we go wrong there?
Oh man, I'll try not to get on a soapbox.
You can stand on it for a second if you want. It's all right.
Because I'm really passionate about helping people understand what forgiveness is and what it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it is weaponized. I've heard so many different things of you have an unforgiving heart or you haven't forgiven and you're holding on to it. And, telling wounded people who are hurting and they're in the worst pain of their life to just forgive and or to move on, it creates shame for what they're rightfully feeling. Like their feelings are very, very valid. And then it creates suppression. And so if someone's saying it to you, or if you're saying it to yourself, the intention is to get to a more comfortable place, right? This is uncomfortable. I don't want to be here. So if I'm telling them to forgive, we'll move past this and it will be on the other end. Or if I'm telling myself I just need to forgive, then I won't be in this place.
Yeah,
It actually does the opposite. It leads to suppression.
I agree.
If we are trying to forgive and we don't fully process, it then becomes emotional bypassing of ourself or of others. And people end up stuffing their pain instead of healing it.
Yeah.
And you can't release what you've never acknowledged. And so that goes for the betrayed spouse. If you're not acknowledging your pain, you're not going to be able to release it. And then it goes for the betraying spouse if we're working towards reconciliation. If you don't acknowledge her pain, it's going to be very difficult for her to release it in the relationship. She could do it individually, but relationally, it'll be really hard. And healing requires honesty, and being honest about your feelings and grieving is the first step.
Yeah. A couple things come up for me when I hear you talking that. I think also this can be spiritualized because there's a lot of, like, if you're religious or spiritual, there's a lot of scriptural things and philosophical things that talk about forgiveness, and it can be spiritualized into, suppression too, where it's like, okay, there's something wrong with me, or I'm being unrighteous or whatever if I'm not forgiving. And I think the thing that we have to remember is that sometimes the definition of forgiveness gets messed up with trust. So if I forgive, or that it's an external thing, because I think forgiveness is actually an internal job, is my own personal experience. It's like, it's not actually for the other person. It's for you and the other person, or other outside people or belief systems can say, well, if you forgave, then you would trust again. And there's a difference between forgiveness and trust. And forgiveness is an internal job, and trust requires to be rebuilt. You can lose trust in a hurry, but lost trust is regained slowly with consistent change of behaviors and accountability over an extended period of time. And I think that's where it can get weaponized sometimes too. Well, the reason why you don't trust me is because you don't forgive me. No, the reason why we're not trusting is because there's a lack of trustworthy behaviors going on here, or they haven't been present for long enough that we have consistency to trust it again. And even like, well, you're holding on to this, and so you're the reason why we can't move on, and have that get turned back around on you. I think that it can be weaponized or spiritualized in that way too. And we have to be really careful about that.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. It's also confused that forgiveness means reconciliation.
Yes. Yes.
And if forgiveness does not mean reconcile, I can forgive you and I can never talk to you again.
Right.
And so before I specialized in betrayal trauma, I specialized in sexual trauma and sexual abuse. And it would be unheard of if I told a sexual abuse victim, to forgive them, you must reconcile with them.
Right.
It's like, no. Like, you are a victim. You don't ever need to speak to them again. So forgiveness, reconciliation, and in the middle is trust. Yeah. So I think of it kind of like on a continuum. I'm also a visual person, if you can't tell. And so I've drawn a line for people of forgiveness is here. It's not a prerequisite towards the other things. And then also with forgiveness, that's something I may have to do every day.
Right.
Because something's going to activate me and I'm going to get all worked up, and then I'm going to have to choose to forgive you in that moment.
Right.
And just because I'm activated, it doesn't mean that I didn't forgive you yesterday or for the past 5 years.
Right.
No, it is a decision. I'm choosing to forgive you. And then it's a process. And that process could be for the rest of my life.
Yeah. It's not a one-time job for me either. My other podcast is called Choosing to Stay, and it's because we're choosing every single day, whether we're choosing to stay or whether we're not choosing to stay, but we're making that choice. And I love that pendulum of forgiveness and reconciliation with trust being in the middle, which makes me think of how important boundaries are in all of this, in even being able to release the resentment. Like if we don't have boundaries and we continue to be abused or in the harmful situation, it's going to be really hard to let the resentment move through. And so learning how to protect ourselves when necessary with healthy boundaries, I think is a really important piece of being able to release the resentment and moving into that empowerment. So what would you say the difference between like boundaries as empowerment versus boundaries as like avoidance or walls?
Yeah. I think what makes it difficult is bitterness, because bitterness feels like protection.
Yeah.
And it feels like a boundary in some way. In some ways, bitterness is my cheerleader to my boundary. It's like, no, keep those boundaries, like keep those walls up.
Yeah.
And yes, we do need boundaries, but they need to be healthy boundaries.
Right.
And where they're conducive for what our end goal is. And of course, we need to be mindful of like, are they doing their work? Acknowledging your pain. We talked about at the beginning of it hurt you deeply. There's certain behaviors that you don't have to tolerate, and not allowing the resentment to consume you on an everyday basis will allow more healthy boundaries.
And I think about it too as like the healthy boundaries, and healthy being the key word there, which that's a whole nother topic on of itself. But when boundaries are implemented and held in a healthy way, it helps us focus on that empowerment. In my experience is like, okay, what do I have control of? What am I okay with and what am I not okay with? And what will I do if the unhealthy thing that I'm not okay with is happening? That moves me into an empowered place of I'm not waiting for somebody else to create my safety or to do whatever. I know what I will do if I need to create my own safety. So it helps me move into that place of empowerment. And also on the other side of that, I think it empowers the other person to make their own choices and deal with the consequences without us having to control it, because really we don't have any control. Sometimes we feel like we do, but we actually don't. So that's where the role of healthy boundaries, I think, is so important too, is moving us into a place of empowerment, but also giving the empowerment back to the other person at the same time to choose.
Yeah. And you reminded me of how boundaries are often misunderstood. And how we frame boundaries. So when I'm doing a boundaries list with a betrayed spouse, which now I don't even call it that anymore, I call it a safety plan, because it's what you are going to do for your own safety and what you're willing and unwilling to accept. I think it makes all the difference, because then we have clear expectations. Because if we're expecting for our boundaries to be respected, but we're putting the control into their, for an example, I need him to go to a meeting weekly. And so my boundary is he's going to a meeting weekly. And it's like, that's a request that,
or
like
a rule that we're expecting him to follow, like a child, right?
Yeah. He has his own autonomy. He may or may not do it. And so if he chooses not to do it, how can we reframe that? And it's like, I feel safest when my husband's in recovery. If he chooses to not do recovery, then what I need is, and it's something that you give yourself.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to steal that reframe, because sometimes people will come and say, okay, I worked on my boundaries and here they are, and I'm going to give them to him. And it's like this list of rules that we expect him to follow, which also then puts us in the parent-child, teacher-student dynamic, which nobody wants to parent their spouse and nobody wants to be parented by their spouse. And it really is almost like handing somebody else your power. I kind of hate the list of rules for boundaries, because it's like here's what I need, and I'm giving you all the power to keep me safe. So I love that reframe of like a safety plan of this is what I need and this is what I will do if this isn't happening for me. So
yeah.
that's so good.
And I also, what I love about boundaries now that we're on the topic, and I know we're kind of going sideways, but
It's all connected.
it really is a lot of boundaries can first be made out of an emotional response.
Mhm.
And if we make our boundaries from an emotion, it's like, okay, if he does this, then I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be happy. But if he doesn't, then I'm going to be angry and resentful. And that makes it very difficult. But if we place our boundaries into how I want to live my life from morals and values, what do you value? They usually don't shift with emotional regulation or dysregulation because that's just the core of how you live. And it takes some time because we could use that same boundary of feel safe when he goes to recovery. So what does him going to recovery give you in safety? And how is that applying to your morals and values? Breaking that down with the betrayed spouse to really get clear of what are they envisioning for their life. And what I love about it is then dependent on who I'm working with, their spouse's recovery plan. Ideally, your spouse has his own set of his own safety plan, which is his recovery plan. And your safety plan and his recovery plan ideally would be mirroring each other because you guys have aligned values.
Yeah. And if they don't, then that's really good information for you. Or if he doesn't have a recovery plan, that's also good information for you, right? Like if he's just not, then you need to know that as well too. And then your safety plan can adjust based on that information.
Yes. Yeah.
There's empowerment right there, right? We're moving into empowerment when we create our own safety plan and not put our list of boundaries in his lap, expecting him to follow our rules to keep us safe. Okay. I love this. I love just the envision and some real practical application of what our listeners can do to move out of that place, because I think it's important too to just normalize the resentment and the bitterness. It is going to come and the anger, and there's nothing wrong with it. And if you're like me, I hate sitting in it for very long because it's uncomfortable for me. So anger and resentment is normal. It is going to happen. You're probably going to have to move through it. If you're like me more than once, it's going to come up. And so if we can think about using it for information on what we can do to move into a place of empowerment, then I think it feels less paralyzing and less stuck, and it gives it that motion and that movement that we need to feel empowered to move to a different place. I love this conversation. Thank you so much, Tesa, for joining me today. If our listeners feel called to connect with you, tell me where they can find you and how they can get in touch with you.
The easiest way is probably my website, roottobloomtherapy.com, and then social media, Talking with Tesa on Instagram. And those are the best ways to contact me.
Awesome. I will make sure that we put those links in the show notes so that people can easily find you. And if you haven't followed Tesa on social media yet, you should. I follow her and was telling her before we started that I'm inspired by her, which is why she's here today. So I appreciate you taking the time to come and share your wisdom with our audience. And for those of you listening, if you have enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody else who could benefit. Please rate the show and leave me a review to help grow the audience so that others who need it can find this resource. And I appreciate you being here, and I hope that you'll join us again next week. Thank you for being here with me inside Rooted and Rising Healing. Remember, healing isn't a destination. It's a returning to your truth, to your voice, to the woman you were always meant to be. You have the power to rise at your own pace, in your own way. And when it feels hard, just come back to your breath and remind yourself, still I rise. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love if you shared it with another sister on the journey. And until next time, stay rooted, stay rising. You've got this.